Your life looks fine. On paper, everything holds together. The job, the routines, the people, the places, they are all still here. But inside, something has shifted. You wake up in the same bed. You sip your morning coffee in the same cup. The world around you plays its usual melody, and yet you feel like you're not part of it anymore. There's no crisis, no tragedy, no moment you can point to and say, this is where it changed. But the emptiness is undeniable. You sit in conversations, and while your voice still speaks, your heart remains silent. It feels like watching your own life from a distance, like a dream where you recognize everything but feel disconnected from all of it. You're there, but you're not really there. And the hardest part? No one sees it. They see your smiles. They hear your laughter. They assume you're fine because the surface looks stable. But inside, there's a quiet ache you can't explain. You try to tell yourself you should be grateful because nothing is technically wrong. But gratitude doesn't erase the quiet truth. You don't feel like you belong to this version of your life anymore. You've outgrown something, but you don't yet know what. You sense that the life you've built is too small for who you're becoming, but you're still trapped inside its walls. There's an invisible discomfort sitting in your chest, a whisper that says, there has to be more than this. And no matter how you distract yourself, it returns. In the pauses, in the silences, in the moments between obligations. This isn't failure. This isn't weakness. This is the stirring of something real, the first quiet rebellion of your soul against the life you've been surviving. It doesn't come with fanfare. It doesn't scream for attention. It simply waits like a gentle pull beneath everything familiar, inviting you to stop performing, inviting you to finally come home, not to the life everyone sees, but to the self you've been slowly forgetting. You were never fully taught how much of you isn't actually you. The way you react, the way you speak to yourself when no one's listening, the way your shoulders tense when certain people enter the room. Most of it was given to you, handed down like invisible heirlooms from childhood, from family, from pain. You absorbed voices before you even knew you were listening. The voice that whispers, "You're not enough." The voice that panics when someone disapproves. The voice that urges you to shrink, to stay safe, to avoid being too much. And over time, you made those voices your own. You called them personality. You called them identity. But they were only survival strategies stitched into your nervous system. The way you apologize for existing too loudly. The way you minimize your needs to keep the peace. The way you perform interest in conversations that secretly drain you. None of it was born from your truth. It was born from adaptation. You were taught who you needed to be to feel safe, to be loved, to avoid being left behind, and you became excellent at it. So excellent that you forgot there was ever a version of you underneath all the rehearsals. Sometimes you catch glimpses when you're alone, when the noise fades, when the world isn't watching. A moment of pure stillness, and there beneath all the layers, you feel a different kind of you. One that doesn't owe anyone an explanation. One that breathes without apologizing for taking space. One that feels foreign, yet deeply familiar. But before you can stay there, the old programming pulls you back. The discomfort rises, the urge to please, the fear of being misunderstood. the instinct to smooth things over so no one feels uneasy. Because that's how you've survived. Not by being fully yourself, but by bending just enough to fit into every room you entered. And now that you're waking up, you see how exhausting it's been. How much energy it took to constantly shrink yourself to fit someone else's comfort. It wasn't your fault. You did what you had to do. You learned to read the unspoken rules early, to scan every room for danger, to calculate every word for safety, and it worked. It got you here. But now, here is no longer enough. The version of you built for survival cannot carry you into what's next, because what's calling you isn't safety, it's truth. And truth doesn't need permission to exist. This is the ache you've been feeling, not depression, not emptiness, but the slow unraveling of a life lived on borrowed scripts and the quiet emergence of the self you buried to survive. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no grand explosion, no dramatic breakdown. It starts with the smallest cracks in the mirror you've always looked into. You're sitting with old friends, listening to the same stories you've heard 100 times before. You nod. You smile. You even laugh when the group expects you to. But somewhere beneath your performance, you feel an emptiness. Not boredom. Not irritation. Just a quiet knowing that you're no longer inside the moment. That you're watching yourself play a part you didn't even realize you were still playing. Later, someone texts you. Their name pops up, and instead of excitement, your stomach tightens. Not because they did anything wrong, but because you remember who you have to become when you're around them. The bending, the softening, the shrinking of your truth to avoid uncomfortable silences. You walk into familiar spaces that once felt warm. Now they feel distant, as if the air itself carries a weight you never noticed before. The conversations feel thinner. The laughter feels forced. The connection feels manufactured. You begin to catch yourself saying, "Yeah, it's fine," when it's not. Not out of kindness, but out of habit. A reflex you never questioned until now. Even your body joins the rebellion. Your chest tightens when you entertain certain topics. Your stomach knots when you pretend to be interested. Your energy drains not because you're physically tired, but because you're emotionally collapsing under the weight of pretending. And yet nobody sees it. The world keeps applauding your politeness, your adaptability, your ability to stay agreeable even when your soul is silently screaming for honesty. It's disorienting, because part of you still wants to be liked, still wants to belong, still wants to keep everyone comfortable. But another part of you, stronger now, whispers, "This isn't living, this is performing," the hardest truth. You've spent years perfecting roles that no longer serve you. The peacemaker, the pleaser, the one who never asks for too much. And now, as those roles begin to crumble, you feel naked without them. Who are you, if not who you've always tried to be for others? That's where many turn back. Back into the safety of routine. Back into autopilot. Back into numbness. But you're still here. Still watching, still noticing. And every time you notice, you take one step closer to yourself. Not the self you built to survive, the one you lost along the way. This is the part no one warns you about. The space between who you were and who you are becoming. You don't belong to your old life anymore, but you haven't fully arrived in your new one either. It's a strange kind of loneliness, not because you're alone, but because you no longer fit where you once did. You find yourself pulling away from conversations that once entertained you. The surface-level chatter now feels like static in your ears. Small talk exhausts you. Forced laughter feels like a betrayal of your own soul. You try to explain it to people. They nod politely, but their eyes say they don't understand. They tell you you're overthinking, that you're being too sensitive, that you should just relax and enjoy life. But how do you explain to someone that it's not stress you're feeling, it's clarity, that you're no longer hypnotized by distractions that used to keep you comfortable, that you see through the smiles, the performances, the endless pretending. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. There's a grief here, a subtle mourning for the version of yourself who was willing to stay asleep. That version who would laugh along to keep the peace, who would carry conversations that left you drained, who would stay longer in rooms you knew you should have left. You don't hate that version of you. You feel compassion for them because they did what they had to do to survive. They adapted. They fit in. They sacrificed pieces of truth just to feel safe. But you're not that person anymore. And letting go of them feels like losing an old friend, even if that friend was never truly who you were meant to be. There are nights where you sit in the quiet and wonder if you're breaking, if you've made some terrible mistake. Because while others seem content in the noise, you crave silence. While they fill their days with more, you long for less. Less pretending, less performing, less of everything that once defined your worth. And the hardest part, you don't have the new map yet. You know where you can't return, but you don't fully know where you're headed. You're floating in between identities, between versions of yourself. But this is not failure. This is not emptiness. This is the space where transformation breathes, where the old falls away, not with violence, but with stillness. And in that stillness, something quiet begins to grow, something real. You're not lost. You're no longer willing to pretend you're fine with being lost. That's the difference. And that difference is everything. One day, without much thought, you say no. Not angrily, not defensively, just softly, firmly, as if your whole body simply refuses to play along. An invitation arrives, the kind you used to accept out of obligation, out of guilt, out of habit. But this time, you pause. You feel your chest tighten. You sense the old pattern wanting to take over, to say yes, to be agreeable, to keep the peace. But something inside whispers, no more. And you honor it. You decline. Not because you're being difficult, but because you finally hear yourself. The world doesn't understand at first. They ask, are you okay? They sense the shift, but can't name it. Because you've always been so accommodating, so available, so easy to count on, even when it cost you your own peace. Now, that version of you is dissolving. And with every small no, you reclaim another piece of yourself. You find yourself speaking slower too, not out of fear, but because for the first time, you want to listen to your own words before you release them into the world. You choose your truth, not their comfort. Some rooms grow quieter around you. You're no longer the entertainer, no longer the one smoothing over every awkward silence, no longer the one laughing at jokes that never truly amused you. You stand in your own energy, now raw, unpolished, honest. And it feels strange at first. You wonder if you're losing pieces of who you were. But what's really happening is simpler than that. You're peeling away the layers you built out of survival. The masks you wore to belong are slipping. The roles you rehearsed for years no longer fit your skin. And underneath all that, there you are. Quieter, stronger, less reactive, more real. It's not that life becomes perfect. Far from it. But it becomes real. And real feels better than perfect ever did. Because now, you're not performing peace. You're starting to feel it. In your bones, in your breath, in the gentle weight of your own presence. The world doesn't quite know how to react to this version of you. Some pull away, confused by your boundaries. Others criticize, calling you distant, cold, changed. And they're not wrong. You are changed. You're no longer willing to filter your truth through someone else's comfort. You're no longer bending yourself into smaller shapes just to fit into spaces that were never built for your fullness. You don't announce this shift. You don't declare it with speeches or social posts. You simply live it, quietly, steadily, as if you finally come home to yourself. One morning, you wake up and something feels different. Not because anything around you has changed, but because everything inside you has. You don't reach for your phone the moment your eyes open. You sit for a while, breathing into the quiet, not needing to fill it, not needing to fix it, just allowing yourself to be here. The anxiety that once hummed beneath your skin begins to fade. The urgency that always pushed you to prove yourself grows silent. You no longer feel like you're being watched, even when you're alone. You stop narrating your every thought as if someone is keeping score. For the first time, you're not trying to manage how the world sees you. You're simply allowing yourself to exist. And your mind resists at first. It panics. It whispers that you're slipping, that you're disconnected, that you're not doing enough. Because your old self only knew how to survive through constant tension, through performance, through pleasing. But now, there's space. Space where fear used to live. And in that space, something unfamiliar but beautiful begins to grow. Not excitement, not even confidence, but a quiet knowing. A deep recognition that you are finally showing up as yourself, not the version of you built to survive, but the one that always existed beneath the noise. The world reacts as it always does to this new version of you. Some people grow distant. They don't recognize you without your old patterns. They call you cold, different, harder to reach. And they're right. You've stopped bending, stopped softening your truth to make others feel big, stopped carrying emotions that were never yours to hold. You no longer enter conversations trying to fix, to heal, to maintain the comfort of others at the expense of your own peace. You don't need to explain yourself. Your silence speaks for you now. It says, I no longer belong to places that ask me to abandon myself. And as you hold this space, something beautiful happens. Life begins to rearrange itself, not in loud ways, not with grand gestures, but with gentle shifts that feel like alignment. The people who remain are the ones who don't flinch at your boundaries, the ones who meet your quiet with their own, the ones who see you not for what you give, but for who you are. And for the first time, you feel free. Not because you have everything figured out, but because you finally stop performing. You no longer mistake movement for progress. You no longer confuse chaos with meaning. You've slowed down. not because you've given up, but because you've come home. At some point, you stop asking why, not because you found all the answers, but because you realize you don't need them anymore. You stop dissecting every memory. You stop revisiting every conversation, trying to find what you could have done differently. You stop spinning in circles inside your own mind, desperate for certainty. Because the truth is, life was never meant to be fully understood. It was meant to be lived. And sometimes, living means letting go of your need to control how the story unfolds. You no longer search for signs to validate your growth. You don't need proof that you've healed. You feel it in the quiet, steady rhythm of your own breath, in the way you no longer abandon yourself to keep others comfortable. You let people misunderstand you. You let situations remain unresolved. You release the need to circle back, to explain, to fix, not out of coldness, but out of peace. Because you finally understand that not every loose end needs to be tied for you to feel whole. And the more you let go, the more life reorganizes itself around you. The people who once needed your constant availability drift away. The conversations that once drained you fade into silence. The chaos you once called normal no longer finds a home inside you. You notice the difference in your own body. Your shoulders rest a little lower. Your jaw stays unclenched. Your stomach no longer tightens at every uncertainty. You trust yourself now, not because you've predicted the future, but because you know you can meet whatever comes without losing who you are. You stop reading into every pause, every delay, every unanswered message. You stop tying your worth to how quickly others respond to you. You stop mistaking urgency for importance. And something beautiful happens. Life slows. Not because it grows dull, but because it finally breathes in rhythm with you. No more chasing. No more proving. No more striving to be digestible for people who never saw you clearly. You exist fully in your own stillness. And from that stillness, everything not meant for you quietly falls away. You realize, with gentle clarity, you were never broken. You were simply exhausted from carrying what was never yours. And now you've put it down, not with fanfare, not with grand declarations, but with a quiet surrender that says, I'm done performing. I'm ready to simply be. And then, almost without noticing, you arrive. Not at some grand destination, not at the version of yourself you spent years chasing, but at something softer, something simpler, something true. You no longer feel the need to hold everything up. The false identities, the unspoken obligations, the emotional weight you once carried for others, they've all quietly dissolved. Because the moment you stopped feeding them, they lost their power to stay. What remains isn't emptiness, it's you, clear, unperformed, unedited, still here. You wake up, and the world feels quieter, not because life has become easier, but because you've stopped fighting it. You've stopped fighting yourself. There's no longer a war raging inside your mind to prove, to justify, to explain. There is only presence. You move through your days with a steadiness that doesn't need to announce itself. You enter rooms no longer scanning for safety, but for alignment. You trust the subtle wisdom in your body, the way it expands in spaces that hold you and contracts in spaces that don't. You don't force connections anymore. You allow energy to guide you gently, naturally. If it flows, you follow. If it resists, you release. No bargaining. No overthinking, no performing. The people who remain in your life are not those who demand from you, but those who witness you. They do not shrink in the face of your boundaries. They meet your stillness with their own. There is no weight, no pulling, no silent expectations. Only quiet, mutual respect. And when you sit alone, you no longer fear the silence, because it no longer feels like absence. It feels like arrival. You don't need to prove your healing to anyone. You don't need milestones or certificates or witnesses. The proof is in how your nervous system breathes softer now, in how your chest no longer tightens where it once did, in how your soul finally feels like it belongs to itself again. You see life as it is, not as you once tried to control it into being. You no longer ask it to make perfect sense. You allow it to unfold one breath at a time. And perhaps that was the awakening all along, not to build a perfect life, but to stop abandoning yourself in pursuit of one. You realize you were never lost. You were simply buried, and now uncovered. You finally see what was always there waiting beneath the noise yourself. Whole, quiet, unshaken.